Hello, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Hearing. I'm Brian Taylor. Our topic this week is the use of remote aftercare services for cochlear implant patients. Here to discuss this important topic and a new study that looks at remote care with these patients is clinical audiologist Dr. Sandra Porps of the Michigan Ear Institute. Welcome to This Week in Hearing, Sandra. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I'm really looking forward to our talk today.
Yeah, I guess before we get started, let's kick things off by having you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your role at the Michigan Ear Institute.
Great. Well, I live in Michigan. I'm from Wisconsin originally, so Midwest. I did my undergrad work at Marquette University in Milwaukee, and then I did my graduate work at Central Michigan. I did my fourth year at Michigan Ear Institute, and I have stayed on ever since for about almost 18 years now. So I am a clinical audiologist, and then now I work primarily with cochlear implant patients.
Great, and that's why that's why we had you on the show today to talk about cochlear implant patients and your expertise in that area. My first question for you, Sandra, is I read recently that there are only about 5% of the more than about 2 million adults who are potential candidates for cochlear implant technology have actually been treated. That number seems really low, 5% of potentially 2 million. Can you tell us a little bit why that population is so undertreated?
Yes, it makes me sad too. There's a lot of factors. So accessibility is a huge one. If you look at our study, we dropped, and which we'll get into, which we'll talk about, but the number of visits required in that first year, that could be time off work, that could be travel time, that could be a loved one's time off work. So accessibility in terms of time is certainly a big part of it. Accessibility in terms of centers. There are some areas like Michigan, where I am, where we have a lot of really great cochlear implant centers. But then there are some of my colleagues out in the West where, my colleague might live in Colorado, but might have to drive, to Wyoming to get treatment for some of these people. So that's certainly part of it as well. And then the referrals. A lot of physicians might not know what the current criteria is that their patients really can get cochlear implants a lot earlier now with the expanded Medicare access last fall than they were previously. So Medicare, previously the criteria was you had to score 40% or less on sentence testing. Now it's 60% or less. So that criteria has been expanded, which opens cochlear implantation up to even more people. But we just have to get the word out to physicians and other referral centers that your patients can be helped a lot sooner than you think they can.
Yeah, and I know a lot of audiologists are still unfamiliar with the new criteria candidacy requirements. So it's good to get the word out. And actually, we've had other guests on This Week in Hearing recently that have talked in detail about the 60 by 60 requirements that are new.
Which is wonderful. Yeah, I agree. Getting the word out there is so important. And I thank you for the work that you do to do that.
Well, before we talk about your study, I think it would be helpful if you could kind of give us a little context around the traditional sequence of appointments for adults who are cochlear implant wearers.
Yeah, so traditionally there's a number of appointments in that first year. At our own center, Michigan Ear, prior to this study, you had your activation appointment. Then you had follow-ups at 1 week, 2 week, and 3 weeks. Then you had a follow-up a month later, then 3 months later, then 6 months later, and eventually once a year. So that was a whole lot in that first year. And that was a big commitment for our patients to commit to.
I would imagine, especially if you're driving any more than even a half an hour, that's a big burden.
Yeah. Well, and you don't think about Michigan being a very large state, but it is. At Michigan Ear Institute, over 50% of our patients have a 3-hour plus drive.
Yeah, so that's a big time commitment for all that follow-up care.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your study. I know that you're the lead author on a recently published multi-center study that looks at a better way to care for patients after implantation. So tell us a little bit about the study and what you found.
Sure. So I've got to be author of this paper with some wonderful colleagues. There were 5 audiologists that participated across 3 centers, us in Michigan and then 2 in Texas. And what we did is, taking that very extensive model of so many follow-up visits in the first year, we shortened that down to 4 visits. So you have activation 1 month, 3 month, and then 6 month, and then annual as needed.
Mm-hmm.
So that took that from a number of visits down to 4, which is a lot easier for our patients.
Great. And so what did you find in your study? Like, did the patients benefit from the remote options? Were the outcomes different? Tell us more about what you found.
So, in the findings, there's a number of things that we found. The first was we look at audiologically. How are these patients hearing compared to their traditional counterparts? Because if they were delayed in their hearing abilities, if they weren't reaching those same milestones, then this would not be effective. And we found that at 3 months and 6 months, they were meeting their hearing milestones. They were scoring very, very similarly to patients that underwent the traditional model. So that was great. The second part was how happy are they overall with their hearing? And they were very happy. Again, scored very similarly to the patients that went through a traditional model. And the last is their service. Were they happy with the service they received? And 14 out of 14 subjects that underwent the full, that stayed with us throughout the full trial, they all rated their service as excellent, which was fantastic. We were very happy to see that.
Yeah, I mean, those are fantastic outcomes. And for those that want to read the study, there'll be a link in the show notes to where that study was published. I think it was just published a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken. Right.
Yep, in Cochlear Implants International, which was,
Very nice.
yeah, yes.
Well, as we wrap things up here, could you maybe share with us, given your 18 years of experience with this population, what are some things that other hearing care professionals really need to know about remote CI, aftercare, cochlear implant candidacy? What insights might you want to share with our audience?
One of the parts of this study was embracing the remote care. Through Cochlear, you can have remote visits either via remote assist with your audiologist, you can have remote checks via your Cochlear app, and you can also have visits with the recipient support manager. And I know at first when we started this, we weren't really sure that this population was going to embrace that. And I found quite the opposite was true. They absolutely embraced the remote options. And in many ways, I feel much closer to my patients, being that I could see into their world and doing a remote assist appointment, for example. I can see their living room. I can see where are you sitting? Where's your spouse sitting when you're trying to watch TV? And being able to do this together really helped give realistic expectations and help the counseling aspect. When I start talking with my patients about using remote options, the first question I always say is, have you ever done a FaceTime video with your grandkids or your kids? And when they say, oh, yes, we do that all the time. If you can do a FaceTime video, you can do a remote session, whether that is with your audiologist or with a recipient support manager. You can do any of the remote tools if you can do a FaceTime video.
Well, that's really interesting and great to know that if you make it available, let people know that remote care is an option, that they tend to embrace it. I think that's a lesson for all hearing care professionals out there.
Yes, it's been a great journey.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. This is great information. And like I said, there'll be a link in the show notes to the study that you were the lead author on. And again, our guest today, clinical audiologist, Dr. Sandra Porps of the Michigan Ear Institute. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me.